The escape pod's oxygen ran out 14 hours before she found me. I know because I was counting every breath, rationing what remained, doing the mathematics of survival that every spacer learns during basic training, and prays they never have to use. My name is Elias, and I was a maintenance technician on the cargo hauler Persistent Fortune, a ship that had earned its name by surviving routes that killed vessels twice its size. I had been with the crew for 7 years, long enough to know every bolt and seam and vulnerable joint in that beautiful, ugly ship, long enough to consider its corridors my home and its crew my family. The pirates who attacked us did not care about any of that. They came out of a debris field where nothing should have been hiding, their weapons already firing before our sensors registered their presence. The Persistent Fortune was a cargo ship, built for endurance rather than combat, and she died the way cargo ships die when predators catch them in the empty spaces between stars. I was in the secondary engine room when the first breach happened. Felt the ship shudder around me like a living thing taking a mortal wound. Heard the alarms that meant everything was about to end. I ran for the escape pods because running was all I could do. I was not a fighter. I was a man who fixed broken things. And there was nothing I could fix that would save the ship or the people screaming in the corridors behind me. The pod launched automatically when I sealed myself inside, its primitive systems hurling me away from the dying vessel with enough force to press me into the acceleration couch until I thought my ribs would crack. I watched through the tiny viewport as the Persistent Fortune came apart, as the pirates picked through her wreckage for whatever cargo had survived, as the only home I had known for 7 years became expanding cloud of debris and frozen bodies. The pod was designed for short-term survival, a desperate measure meant to keep occupants alive long enough for rescue ships to arrive. But rescue ships only came to routes that were traveled regularly, and the Persistent Fortune had been taking a shortcut through a sector that most navigators considered too dangerous to bother with. I was alone in dead space, surrounded by nothing but void and the distant light of stars that would never know I existed. I rationed the oxygen as carefully as I could, breathing shallow, staying still, trying to extend my survival window from hours to days, in hopes that someone might stumble across my distress beacon before it was too late. I watched the gauge drop with terrible slowness, each breath bringing me closer to the moment when there would be nothing left to breathe. I thought about my life, the choices that had led me here, the people I would never see again, the things I had left unsaid because I always assumed there would be time later. I thought about my mother, dead now for 20 years, who had warned me that space was no place for gentle souls. I thought about the woman I had loved on a station 3 sectors away, who had asked me to stay and been refused because I was too restless to settle, too afraid of commitment to accept what she offered. I thought about all the small cowardices that defined the life, the moments when I chose safety over risk, comfort over passion, survival over meaning. The oxygen gauge reached 0 and kept dropping into the red zone that meant I was breathing recycled, nothing, air that had passed through my lungs so many times it could no longer sustain life. My vision started to blur around the edges. My thoughts grew slow and scattered like leaves in a dying wind. I felt my body beginning to shut down, systems failing one by one, as my brain prioritized which parts of me deserved the last scraps of oxygen in my blood. This is it, I thought. This is how Elias the maintenance tech dies, alone in the dark, breathing nothing, waiting for a rescue that will never come. Then the void opened and she reached through, and everything I thought I knew about reality revealed itself as a comfortable lie I had been telling myself since birth. She did not arrive in a ship or a vessel or any conveyance that physics would have permitted. She simply appeared in the space outside my viewport, floating in the vacuum as if air and pressure and temperature were suggestions that did not apply to her. Her form was humanoid but stretched and elongated in ways that made my failing brain struggle to process what my eyes were seeing. Her skin was the color of the void itself, absolute black that seemed to drink the light from the distant stars. Her eyes were not eyes at all but windows into something else, portals that show galaxies spinning in depths that should not have fit inside a skull. Her hair flowed around her like a corona of darkness, each strand a tendril of shadow that moved with purpose and awareness. She was naked in the way that concepts are naked, unconcerned with physical form, because physical form was something she wore rather than something she was. She pressed her hand against the viewport, and the metal that should have been unbreakable parted like water. peeling back to grant her access without exposing me to the vacuum that should have killed me instantly. She flowed into the pod like smoke, filling the tiny space with her presence until I could not tell where she ended and the darkness behind my eyes began. She touched my face with fingers that were cold and warm and neither, and I felt something flow from her into me, something that pushed back the death that had been settling over my consciousness like a burial shroud. I gasped, and oxygen filled my lungs despite the gauge still reading 0. I coughed, and air burned in my chest despite the pod systems insisting that no air remained. I looked up into those galaxy eyes and I saw something that might have been curiosity, or hunger, or a loneliness so vast that it made my own isolation look like a minor inconvenience. She spoke without speaking, her thoughts appearing in my mind like they had always been there, and I was only now noticing them. She told me her name was Nyxara, and she was a priestess of the Void, a guardian of the spaces between spaces, a being who had existed since before the first stars ignited and who would exist long after the last stars burned out. Her kind had once been many, she told me. Entities who maintained the fabric of reality by existing in the gaps that held everything together. But existence was not stasis, and even beings of the void were subject to entropy. Her sisters had faded one by one across eons that made the age of the universe seem brief, their consciousness dispersing into the darkness they had once shepherded, until only Nixara remained. She had been alone for longer than most species had existed, drifting through the void between galaxies, watching civilizations rise and fall and rise again without ever being seen by the creatures whose reality she maintained. She had stopped expecting to encounter anything interesting long ago, had accepted that her existence would be eternal solitude until she eventually faded like her sisters, and then she had sensed something impossible. She had sensed me. Not my body, not my distress beacon, not any physical signal that her senses were designed to detect. She had sensed my soul. She told me that most beings had souls that burned like candles, small flames that flickered briefly and then went out, leaving nothing behind but cooling ash. Some beings had souls that burned brighter, torches that illuminated their small corners of existence before succumbing to the same inevitable darkness. But my soul, she said, my soul burned like a star. Not literally, she clarified, sensing my confusion, but with an intensity that had drawn her attention across distances that should have made detection impossible. She did not understand why. She had observed countless souls across her eternal existence, and none of them had shone with the same impossible brightness. She had theories, hypotheses formed from eons of lonely contemplation, but none of them explained what she was seeing when she looked at me. She only knew that finding me was the most significant thing that had happened to her in longer than she could remember, and she was not willing to let me die now that she had found me. The choice she offered was not really a choice at all, not in any meaningful sense. I could accept her gift and live, bound to her in ways that would transform my existence beyond recognition, or I could refuse and die, my bright soul extinguishing in the next few minutes as my body finally surrendered to the oxygen deprivation that was already killing me. She told me honestly that she did not know what accepting would mean for me, what the consequences of bonding with a being of the void might be for a creature of flesh and blood and limited mortality. She only knew that she wanted me to survive, wanted to understand why my soul burned the way it did, wanted to end her isolation with a companion who could see her as she truly was. I looked at her, and I saw the loneliness behind the cosmic indifference, the desperate hope that she was trying to hide behind the ancient dignity of her kind. I saw myself reflected in those galaxy eyes, a small and frightened creature who had been running from connection his entire life because connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. I saw everything I had been and everything I might become, and I made a choice that was not really a choice at all. I said yes. The transformation began immediately, and it was not painful in the way that physical transformations are painful. It was disorienting in ways that transcended pain, my perception of reality expanding beyond the limits that human consciousness was designed to contain. I felt the void for the first time not as absence but as presence, a dimension of existence that had always been there, but that my senses had been too limited to perceive. I felt Nixara's consciousness interweaving with mine, her ancient awareness threading through my thoughts like darkness flowing through the cracks of a damaged vessel. I felt my body change in subtle ways, becoming something that could survive in the spaces between spaces, something that no longer required oxygen or pressure or any of the physical conditions that human life depended upon. When it was over, I was floating in the void beside her, the escape pod drifting empty behind us, my body still recognizably human but different in ways that I was only beginning to understand. I could breathe the nothing that surrounded us. I could see in darkness that should have been absolute. I could feel the fabric of reality beneath my fingers like texture that had always been present but invisible. Most importantly, I could feel her. Nixara was no longer just a presence outside me, but a part of me. Our consciousness connected in ways that made words seem clumsy and inadequate. She felt my wonder at the transformation, and I felt her relief that I had survived it intact. She felt my lingering grief for the crew of the persistent Fortune, and I felt her ancient sorrow for the sisters she had lost across eons of lonely existence. We were still separate beings, still individual in the ways that mattered, but we were also something more now. Something new. Something that neither of us had been before our impossible meeting. She took me to her temple, a structure that existed in the void between a galaxy I did not recognize and the absolute darkness beyond the reach of any light. The temple was not made of stone or metal or any material that physics would have allowed, but of concentrated void. Darkness given form and function by will alone. Corridors twisted through dimensions that hurt my newly expanded mind to navigate. Chambers opened onto views of creation that no human had ever witnessed. The whole structure pulsed with a life that was not quite life. A vitality that came from being part of the fabric that held reality together. She showed me everything, the history of her kind, preserved in memories that she shared directly with my consciousness. The wars they had fought against entities that sought to unravel reality for their own purposes. The sacrifices they had made to maintain the barriers that kept existence from dissolving into chaos. The slow decline as entropy claimed them one by one, their numbers dwindling from millions to thousands to hundreds to finally just one. She showed me the loneliness that had defined her existence for longer than stars had burned, the endless watching and waiting and hoping that something would change while knowing that nothing ever would. She showed me the moment she sensed my soul across impossible distances, the first flicker of hope she had felt in eons. The desperate journey through void after void to reach me before my light went out. And she showed me what she hoped we could become together. She believed that my soul burned bright because humanity was young, she explained. Older species had souls that had dimmed over generations, their spiritual light gradually depleted by the weight of their own history. But humans were new enough that our souls still carried the full intensity of consciousness, undiluted by millennia of existence. My soul in particular burned bright because I had never truly connected with anything, had spent my life holding myself apart from commitment and attachment and the entanglements that dimmed other souls through the friction of relationship. My isolation, the same isolation that had made me miserable, had paradoxically preserved something that most beings lost early in their existence. She wanted to understand that light. She wanted to study it, to learn from it, to perhaps find a way to use it to restore what her kind had lost. But more than that, more than any academic or cosmic purpose, she simply wanted to not be alone anymore. She wanted a companion who could see her, who could know her, who could share the eternity that stretched before her without end. She wanted me, not as a tool or a subject or a means to an end, but as a partner in the truest sense. I should have been frightened. I should have been overwhelmed by the scale of what she was asking, the commitment that would stretch beyond human lifespan into something closer to forever. But something about her honesty, her vulnerability, her willingness to show me everything she was without pretense or manipulation, broke through the walls I had spent my life building. I had run from connection because I was afraid of being hurt, but Nixara had been hurt more deeply than I could comprehend, had lost everything and everyone she cared about, and was still reaching out despite knowing that reaching out meant risking loss again. If she could be brave after everything she had endured, perhaps I could learn to be brave too. The years that followed, if years had meaning in a place beyond the reach of stars, were an education in existence that no human had ever received. Nixara taught me the arts of the void, the techniques her kind had developed for navigating and maintaining the spaces between spaces. I learned to fold reality around myself like a cloak, to step between dimensions as easily as walking through doorways. I learned to see the threads that connected everything, the invisible web of causality and consequence that held the universe together. I learned that existence was far stranger and more beautiful and more terrible than the small corner of it that humans had explored, that our understanding of reality was like a child's understanding of an ocean based on a cup of water. And as I learned, I felt myself changing in ways that went beyond the physical transformation she had given me. The isolation that had defined my human existence began to dissolve as her presence in my consciousness became familiar, comfortable, cherished. I found myself sharing thoughts with her that I had never shared with anyone, fears and hopes and secret shames that I had kept hidden my entire life. She received them without judgment, understanding that souls as bright as mine came with shadows equally deep. She shared her own darkness with me in return, the memories of loss that still ached after eons, the doubts about her purpose that plagued even a being of cosmic significance. We became each other's confessors, partners in honesty that neither of us had ever experienced before. Love came gradually, not as the explosive passion that humans wrote stories about, but as something deeper and more durable. It came in the quiet moments between lessons when we floated together in the void and watched distant galaxies spin through their eternal dance. It came in the shared consciousness that grew more intimate with each passing cycle, our thoughts interweaving until I sometimes forgot where her awareness ended and mine began. It came in the way she looked at me with those galaxy eyes, the way she touched me with hands that could unmake reality, the way she trusted me with vulnerabilities that she had hidden from the universe for longer than stars had burned. I fell in love with a being of cosmic power and ancient loneliness, and somehow, impossibly, she fell in love with me in return. Not because my soul burned bright, not because I represented some hope for her kind's restoration, but because of who I was beneath the light, because I saw her not as a goddess or a monster or a means to some end, but as a person, a being with needs and fears and dreams that were not so different from my own despite the vast gulf between our origins. I learned that even gods are lonely. I learned that even eternal beings need connection. I learned that love does not care about species or lifespan or any of the categories that we use to separate ourselves from each other. We built a life together in her temple between the galaxies, a partnership that combined her ancient wisdom with my mortal perspective in ways that neither of us could have achieved alone. She taught me to be a guardian of the void as her kind had been, to maintain the barriers that kept reality from unraveling, to protect existence from threats that most beings would never know existed. I taught her to see existence through mortal eyes again, to appreciate the beauty in things that were temporary, to find meaning in moments rather than only in eternity. We complemented each other in ways that neither of us had expected, my brightness illuminating corners of her awareness that had grown dark over eons of solitude, her depth giving context to experiences that would have overwhelmed me without her perspective. The universe continued around us, civilizations rising and falling in the brief flickers that we observed from our home in the void. Sometimes we intervened when threats to reality emerged, using powers that I was still learning to wield alongside abilities she had mastered eons before I was born. Sometimes we simply watched, witnesses to the drama of existence that played out across scales too vast for mortal comprehension. But mostly we simply were, two beings who had found each other against impossible odds and who had chosen to face eternity together rather than alone. Looking back now across time that I have stopped measuring in human terms, I understand why my soul burned brighter than the others she had observed. It was not because I was special in any cosmic sense, not because destiny had marked me for significance. It was because I had been so alone, so completely isolated from genuine connection, that my spiritual energy had never been shared or diminished. My loneliness, the same loneliness that had made my human life feel empty and meaningless, had preserved something that most beings spent throughout their existence. It was ironic in ways that still made me laugh sometimes, that the very quality that had made me miserable was also the quality that had saved me, that had drawn Nixara across impossible distances to find a kindred spirit in the void. I was no longer lonely. I had not been lonely for longer than I could remember. My consciousness so thoroughly intertwined with hers that solitude had become a concept I struggled to recall. The maintenance technician who had run from connection his entire life had become half of a partnership that spanned eternities. bound to a being of cosmic power who loved him without reservation or condition. The transformation was more complete than the physical changes she had given me, a fundamental alteration in what I was that left little of my original self except the brightness she had seen from the beginning. Nixara sleeps beside me now, if sleep is the right word for what beings of the void do when they rest. Her consciousness has withdrawn into depths that I cannot follow, processing experiences and maintaining aspects of reality that require focus I do not yet possess. I watch her form drift in the darkness of our temple, beautiful and terrible and utterly mine, and I feel gratitude that transcends any emotion my human existence prepared me to experience. I was dying in an escape pod when she found me, breathing nothing, waiting for an end that would have been lonely and meaningless and forgotten. Now I am part of something larger than I ever imagined, a guardian of existence itself, partner to a goddess who chose me not for what I could do but for what I was. The universe continues to spin around us, stars burning and dying and being born again in cycles that will repeat until entropy finally claims everything. But we will be here through all of it, watching and protecting and loving each other, across scales of time that human language cannot describe. My soul still burns bright, Nixara tells me, but differently now. Not with the isolated intensity of a flame that has never been shared, but with the steady warmth of a light that has found its purpose. I am no longer the candle she described, flickering briefly before going out. I am something else now, something that burns alongside her. Two lights in the void that are stronger together than either could have been alone. You decide what happens next. Part 2 awaits, but only if you demand it. The ancient enemies of the Void Priestesses are stirring in the spaces between realities. Entities that Nyxara believed were destroyed eons ago are gathering power in dimensions that even she cannot easily reach. And the human whose soul burns like a star must become something more than a guardian if existence itself is to survive what is coming. Smash the like. Leave a comment. Tell me you want more. We spent weeks on this, sleepless nights, endless revisions, all for you. If you want the saga to continue, prove it. Your voice is the only thing that keeps this fire burning. The void is waiting, the priestess is watching, and the war for reality itself has only just begun. The choice is yours.